All right, folks, let's do this video. I actually made some notes on this. Because I wanted to remain as together as possible. And I've been wanting to do this video for a while. I've been wanting to do this video for, anyway, how does it matter? I'm finally doing it, right? And the energy, there's a new moon in Taurus in the next, on Friday morning for me, at least. I'm on a Pacific time, so whatever that means for you. And of course, it's a new moon that we're waiting for, and I'll touch on that in a second. This is not the new moon video that I'm going to do, but I do want to do a summary of the Mercury retrograde that just ended yesterday, and I do want to touch on where we are at with the eclipses. In a sense, I want to summarize my last two videos, but I also want to build on them because I want to emphasize where we're at, because from here we only get to move forward. Mercury is now direct, and until Venus goes retrograde in the middle of July, we have 2 months now of what I like to call forward movement. As a reminder, and this is something that I've touched on before, and I'm going to touch on again because I think it helps to think of things this way. I posed or posited that 2023 really started for a lot of us at the end of October and early November, actually, frankly, in December, so that those things are direction. You know, I swear to God, Los Angeles and its helicopters, it's just another kind of, I don't know what it is. It's just so stupid. Sorry about that ambient noise. And it really doesn't happen that often. It's just whatever. It's okay. It's funny, when I do these videos, it comes from a place of a certain type of concentration, and I can't explain it any other way of how easily that concentration can get. Once it's like this kind of narrow focus, and once you're off of that, it's like a laser beam that if something interrupts it, it interrupts its flow, and you kind of have to get back and start that beam again. So November, December, but particularly by the time you headed into December, 2023 could have announced itself. Something new, some proposal, something building, something along those lines. First 3 weeks of January, the first Mercury retrograde of the year, could have been a little bit suspended, but by the time you got past January 21st or so, and certainly by the time you got to the middle of February, the new year got started. The first phase of this new year getting started and moving forward, and things from December bearing fruit or fruition, I would pose ended in a certain sense on the day the sun, Mercury conjuncted the sun in Taurus on May the 1st. So we're now at May the 15th. Really, it may have ended, it may have ended when Mercury went retrograde around April 21st or thereabouts. But irrespective, by May the 15th, that Capricorn cycle that started with that Mercury retrograde and the planets being in Sagittarius, but particularly Capricorn in the month of December and January, and the new year starting off at that point in time, and really taking off by the middle of February and being in action. Let's just say that first phase ended on May the 15th, May the 1st, May the 1st, May the 1st. And I am going to say, and as I mentioned in my Mercury retrograde video where we talked about that cycle, and I'm going to go over this in more detail in a few minutes, a new cycle started on May the 1st. Now, May the 1st to May the 15th can still be for that cycle now in Taurus, a kind of Mercury was still retrograde till yesterday. And so it's still an internal process. It's still a revving up of energies. It's still let's say a restful or a time for repose and reflection. But now, since last night when Mercury went direct, all the way till July the 1st is, and I would say even, let me just give you the date when Venus goes retrograde. Shall I? Will that be helpful? I think some of you already know this, of course. Venus goes retrograde on July the 23rd. So let's say May the 15th. Let's just say May the 20th to July the 20th, shall we? Although you're going to start to feel the forward movement even the next couple of days. Let's just say that May the 20th to July the 20th is what I like to call forward movement. Let's talk about it as somehow being the next phase. And this time period when Mercury was retrograde, April 21st to May the 15th, or if you want to really say April 21st to May the 15th, has been a kind of a need to pause from April 23rd to May the 1st to continue to process everything that happened since December. And from May the 1st to May the 15th to start to lay the groundwork of what direction you want to move in and where it is that you need to focus your energies. Okay? Because the time for action for those of us who have Mercury direct in our birth charts, which is most of us, is now over the next 2 months to really, and the Venus retrograde, which will be followed by a Mercury, we're not going to see, there's between the middle of July, my darlings, and into September, because Venus goes direct on September the 4th, and Mercury then goes direct in Virgo September the 15th. So really, between the middle of July, August, September, we're going to have 2 months of integration between July and September. It's not that there isn't going to be forward movement during that time. It's a very, very intriguing time, this Venus retrograde. I do want to tell you, if you want to look ahead to July 15th, remember that Venus retrograde archetypally is a time of, unless you have Venus retrograde in your birth chart, but even then, is archetypally a time of poverty, is a type of financial restriction, is a time of reevaluating finances and relationships, and whether you are serving your financial life or whether your financial life is serving you. Whether you are working to pay your bills and keep up with your expenses and your lifestyle, or whether your resources and where they're going are really there to serve you in the way that you want to live your life. What are you working for? What are you earning for? Where is your money going? Your relationships, what you value, so pay attention to the next couple of months and lean into the pursuit of goals, particularly when they have to do with the Taurus part of your chart, because the new Mercury cycle that began on May the 1st began in the sign of Taurus. And this Mercury cycle, my dears, this Mercury cycle is going to continue till September the 6th. So again, by the time we get to September the 15th, September the 6th. By the time it's going to be July 15th to September, let's say July 20th to September 20th, if you want to keep sticking to the 20th every month. But let's say between the 15th to 20th, the energy changes. And just as the energy is changing now, Mercury is direct, and we're going to start to feel things start to rev up and move forward again. And will not surprise me at all if for most of us, this end of this first phase of 2023 that ended for some people April 21st, for some people by May the 1st, for some people even yesterday, May the 15th, to be perfectly honest, although you would have felt energy start to rev up around May the 1st into the next phase. It wouldn't surprise me if over the past 3 weeks while Mercury has been retrograde, things have felt suspended. Things have felt like we're processing things from the past. Things may have felt very much in a Mercury retrograde way, as if overt thinking and communication were less favored and less successful than internal processing and a reversing and a thinking about or processing or trying to let the water clear, as the dust settles down in a certain sense. So, it's like picking up silty water and letting that water clear until let the silt settle down. And it's not an overtly knowing conversation. Overt knowing is not going to lead to clarity while Mercury is retrograde. Now, there's one exception, and this is something I did not mention in my Mercury retrograde video, even though I've mentioned it tons of times before, and I think I mentioned it in the video before. If you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart, then it could be that the last 3 weeks found you not quite as at sea as the rest of us mere mortals. It could be that the last 3 weeks found you decisive, and as if things actually moved forward in decisive and intriguing and interesting ways. So I would just want you to keep that in mind. So that's the one exception to what I'm saying. If you have Mercury retrograde in your birth chart, you might feel like the dust settled. When people have Mercury retrograde in their birth chart, it is not unusual for them to be in processing mode for an awfully long time. It is not unusual to encounter someone who has Mercury retrograde in their birth chart who talks a lot, who says forever, it feels like, oh my God, this person, it takes forever for them to reach a conclusion. Or that's what it seems like. Or it takes forever to them to be able. There's a lot of processing. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of, and when Mercury then goes retrograde, I find that they just kind of click into place. They seem to have their own sense of time. People who have Mercury retrograde in their birth chart often have a tendency to be late, or tend to make it when they make it, or tend to get distracted. It's a different way of processing the data and information for the vast majority of the year. And for the 9 weeks that Mercury is retrograde, all of a sudden there's a kind of a clicking and a progress and a decisiveness. So that could very much be the case for people who have Mercury retrograde in their birth chart. For the rest of us, over the past 3 weeks, there may have been an unwilling, always, and an uncomfortable feeling of being sort of at the vortex of the wheel, and the wheel not quite moving, being a sort of a center of a tire that's not moving. Well, now the tire starts to move. Mercury went direct yesterday, so give it 3 or 4 days, honestly, maybe till Thursday, Friday, till Thursday, and certainly for the next 24 to 48 hours, you may really feel some of those Mercury retrograde classic mundane issues, delays in travel, bags getting lost, tickets, and transactions, and delays and nonsense. For me, it really is sort of like dealing with customer service. Those phone calls where you just feel like banging your head against a wall and screaming, because it's just like, it is so logical in your mind, but when you are communicating with the people on the other, you're just like, no, I'm missing this type of screw, and they're like, but that kind of screw is not part of this, and you're like, I'm looking at the thing, and those nonsense discussions where people are just not able to connect. That, for me, and that can happen around anything. The idea of feeling like, even with Mercury retrograde, you're giving yourself an hour and a half to get somewhere that takes 45 minutes, and yet it's going to take 3 hours. That kind of craziness. So some of that you might feel over the next 72 hours or so. The other thing I will again just kind of remind you of, if this is true for you, or if there's something here with Mercury retrograde, and especially with the eclipses happening, and the eclipses occurred while Mercury was retrograde, mortality, especially around the days that Mercury goes retrograde, but especially on the days when Mercury is going direct, and in general, when it comes to eclipses, sort of the mortality veil is kind of thin anyway. So whether it is your own, whether other people's, as I've mentioned to you, I don't know if I think I may have mentioned this in the Mercury retrograde video. I find that if there's a timeline to a certain process, especially if it is one of those processes where there's a general agreement that there's a timeline, someone is dealing with something terminal, then I find that Mercury retrograde, when Mercury goes retrograde, it has a tendency to speed up the process, and a lot of that is kind of dealt with. It's just like, it's almost a kind of sense of like, why are we prolonging the inevitable and the discomfort? Why not just that kind of news, again, the veil thinning could be very present for another 24 hours, could certainly have been present for the past 72 odd hours, but then this entire eclipse period could have had that kind of strange kind of mixing of timelines and mortality kind of feeling. You may find, mercifully, now that Mercury is direct, that the house in which Mercury was retrograde, Taurus, where Taurus sits in your chart, what house that occupies, you might find that matters related to that house now can move forward. And the important thing here for me is the fact that they move forward in such a way. When does I feel like I need to give you some information here, and forgive me for this. When does Mercury conjunct Uranus in Taurus? Sorry, I thought I was completely prepared, but we are doing this while Mercury conjunct Uranus, not Taurus. God help me. Hold on a second, amigos. So, June the 4th, yeah. June the 1st, Jupiter and the North Node conjunct. June the 4th, Mercury conjuncts Uranus. We are going to be, till June the 4th, be clearing, actually, technically, let me give you this information. Technically, when Mercury goes retrograde, it's moving direct, and then it goes retrograde, and then it goes direct. And for the time period that it is retrograde, it moves over certain degrees in our chart, that it then goes over 3 times. The first time when it's direct, then for the 3 weeks that it's retrograde, and then when it's direct again. April 7th is when Mercury first entered the part of the chart where it would move over 3 times during this retrograde period. So as I mentioned in my Mercury retrograde video, you may find that you have been since April 21st till May the 14th, but especially till May the 1st, been processing events and things that were going on between April 7th and 21st. Two dates, because April 7th isn't born out of nothing. They could have something to do with the Libra full moon that happened a day or two before April the 7th. They could even go back to the Mars trine Saturn transit and the Venus conjunct Uranus transit that happened on, oh gosh, when was that? March 30th. So March 30th, Mars trine Saturn and Venus conjuncted Uranus, and yeah, I think there's something, and then the Libra new moon, Libra full moon occurred on April the 6th. So those could be two important pre-events to this Mercury entering the shadow period on April the 7th. April the 21st, Mercury went retrograde, and from April the 21st to March the 1st, and April the 21st, I hate doing videos while Mercury is retrograde. April the 21st to May the 1st, April the 21st to May the 1st, and especially around that May the 1st date, you may really have been in a space of processing April 7th to 21st in some ways. And around May the 1st, you may have had some sort of an epiphany that allowed you to intuitively know something that factually you may not have been able to, either was not disclosed, or there was no way to find out, or there was no information to get. Now, from May the 1st to May the 14th, Mercury still retrograde. As I said in my Mercury retrograde video, at that time, the processing is much more internal. And Mercury retrograde must be appreciated. So one of the things I want you to do is to think about over the last 3 weeks what you know now about how things that were galloping forward between the end of January until, let's just say, the middle of April, that Mercury retrograde's big gift to us is that it reveals things and allows us to process things so that after we move forward, when Mercury goes direct, as it yesterday, we can factor what we have learned and realized and intuitively gleaned in a Mercury retrograde way, and factor them into our way of being and carrying out of our plans as we move forward. So by all means, nothing wrong with doing a final reflection over the next 24 to 48 hours about what it is that and especially around May the 1st, you may have had that epiphany. Now, you may still have been in a place till yesterday, day before, of processing April 7th to 21st, and till May the 31st, because Mercury from yesterday to May the 31st is going to go over these same degrees that it has been going over since April the 7th one final time. You may find that things get reprocessed or brought up again in some ways. Either there's an element of you moving forward and moving on, and this has been going on since May the 1st, since the new Mercury cycle began in the sign of Taurus. But there's also an element till May the 31st of healing, final touches, communications, integrating, going over the same things. There could be conversations, there could be closure potentially, there could be decisions to not provide closure in some ways. There could just be a decision to integrate and move on, and to recognize if, for example, and this would be classic Mercury retrograde, if things have come into your awareness where people are being duplicitous or not clear or hiding things or lying to you, and people have different motivations for doing that. Typically it's cheating in some way, but it's also fear. What is it that makes people lie? But it will give you, the Mercury retrograde period should have given you an ability to understand whether the person or people you're dealing with, whether it's worth engaging with them. Sometimes people behave in ways that they are not aware of, and more importantly, they're not at a point where they can really process or admit to it or integrate it. They might go into denial. And so you might just have to be like, okay, now I know this about this person or this situation or whatever it is, and now I'm going to integrate and move forward, but I may not be really in a place where I feel like I want to have an overt conversation about this. Okay? So keep that in mind as you move forward. The Mercury cycle in Taurus, a lot of emphasis now, the Taurus and Aries part of our chart, the eclipse that happened on April 19th, we will finally start to see this move forward. Forward movement will occur with these three lunations. The Taurus new moon on February, What is, see, this is classic Mercury. The Taurus new moon on Friday, the Sagittarius full moon 2 weeks after that, the Gemini full moon 2 weeks, new moon 2 weeks after that. There's no point. Why communicate while Mercury's still stationary and just slowly moving ahead? Why say anything? Your brain can't keep up with your mouth, or your mouth can't keep up with your brain. So the Taurus new moon, the Sagittarius full moon, the Gemini new moon is when we're going to see the wheel starting to crank forward more and more. Welcome the Taurus new moon, except for this grand cross that everyone keeps talking about. And I'm going to talk about that in my next video. So there is forward movement there. And that is when this Aries solar eclipse, April 19th, where we've been waiting for that eclipse to carry us forward, now is when that eclipse can start to manifest and carry us forward as we head towards June the 19th. Okay? So it's going to be with this Taurus new moon and with the Sagittarius full moon and with the Gemini new moon that we're going to see more and more action. Let's just say continues with this theme of forward movement as you head to the middle of July. The emphasis is very much, okay, how's Mercury was retrograde in? Events that should start moving forward. Houses Mercury rules. Where Virgo sits, where Gemini sits in your chart. Those matters may have seen also a certain amount of reflection and a certain amount of restriction in terms of activities. Those activities should start to clear up. If Mercury rules any of your financial houses, if you're a Leo rising, or if you are, you know what, right now my brain can't, if Mercury, if Gemini or Virgo are in your second and or eighth house, then you might have experienced financial restriction, which should now start to technically ease up, okay? So, for example, that's one way of processing what I'm saying in terms of the houses that Mercury rules and the house that Mercury was in while it was retrograde, which would be where Taurus sits, because Mercury was retrograde in Taurus, and Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. So matters related to those three houses should now start to see greater clearance. Events more in the house that Mercury was retrograde in, the Taurus house. Less suspension and less murkiness in the part of the chart where Gemini and Virgo sit. You know what, folks? I'm going to let you just integrate this. Happy Mercury moving forward. Okay, this is enough of the groundwork that I'm going to lay in this video. There's more to say, and I will say it in future videos. Integrate this much until the next time, because I need Mercury to start moving forward so that I can be more coherent as well. Like, comment, subscribe, click on the bell icon and the wiggly bell thing, and when you click on the bell icon on top to be notified when I do videos. They really, I think, are useful. More to follow, but happy Mercury going direct, and get back in the car and start it, and start shifting the gears from first to second. And especially in the Taurus part of your chart, in conjunction and alliance with the Aries part of your chart, be clear about what your goals are there and move towards them. Move towards them. We have a Taurus new moon, and there's more. I'll share more about that. But this last thing that I said is where we need to now meet. And by all means, integrate and think about what it is that the Mercury retrograde has brought up for you with regard to events, themes that needed integration, lessons that need to be learned, processing, what was not clear, what may still not be clear, but what do you know about it? How do you integrate what you know now moving forward when it particularly comes to that time period between March the 31st and April the 21st? Okay? Talk to you soon.